Professor Brain Brown's research shows that vulnerability fosters good emotional and mental health. It is a sign of courage. We become more resilient and brave when we embrace who we truly are and what we are feeling. The Vulnerable Scientist podcast is a space for scientists to tell their honest and authentic stories. I am your host, Sarah Nyakeri, who happens to be a scientist, informal science communicator, and I help scientists create personal websites. If you want to support this show, go to www.patreon.com/thevulnerable-scientist. You can also follow this podcast on all social media platforms at TV Scientist Pod. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Vulnerable Scientist podcast. And for this podcast, this is another solo podcast where I am going to talk about the new developments or achievements that have happened when it comes to this podcast. So first things first, we have been able to we have been able to gather an audience who are interested on the vulnerable scientist theme, and that means that encourages me because it tells me that I'm doing something actually that there's a gap that I've filled when it comes to this podcast, and that's pretty exciting. And when it comes to this, most of the audience of this podcast are people who I have notified, following someone, then they see that there's this vulnerable scientist podcast space and when they're interested, they follow back most of the time. And but the rest are people who maybe find the podcast somewhere and follow it. So far, for Instagram, I created this Instagram this month actually, and it has 139 followers. And I am following for 18 people. Also, I follow people because I need to know what people are doing and just to get potential guests on this podcast platform. For LinkedIn, which has been longer staying here compared to the other platforms, has 582 followers as of this morning. And this post have been seen over 5,000 times, nearly 6,000 times. So for Twitter, we have how many followers? We have 424 followers, and we are following 459 people. I need to follow more people. It's just that I don't know. Twitter has a lot of restraints when it comes to following people. So there's that. On Spotify, I think I left it at 53. I don't want to open it now. I left it at 53 followers. On Google Podcast, I left it at 33 or 34, I'm not sure. Or 32, I'm not sure. On about 30-something followers. On Audio Mark, I think we have 20-something followers. On YouTube, we have 20 followers or subscribers. Then there's this, I don't know if you've come across 70 something best science podcast to follow. It's a Fitspot thing, and we are listed number what? Number 26, if I'm right. Let me see. Yeah, we listed number 26, and that's a good thing, because it's actually the only podcast that is based in Africa that is listed there. Also, we have been mentioned by one of the content creators when it comes to science communication, who does it in Agikuyu, and Grace Kifoi Kago did this video, and I can see one of the people who have been mentioned is Under the Microscope guys, and let me get that tweet that I saw. Ideal Camry, Mawazo Institute, The Action Kenya, TechLeak Africa, Kids Comp Camp, STEM Impact Kenya. I'm just reading the Twitter, what do you say? Usernames. There's Fake Neck Globe, M. Luga, Kamilimu, The Nas, African Junior News, Science, Taste Afro, Kuala HQ. This is a Kenyan, what is it called? Kenyan STEM Champions or something. Yeah. That felt pretty good. Yeah. To know that someone recognizes what we are trying to do. And I love what the person said. Let me just get that part so that you can listen to it.
Hello, hi.
Let me get to my number. Oh my God, it is.
Luca is a strong
Luga.
Twitter. Please follow. And actually, I am one of the people that runs the Twitter account. So if you hop on there and see something that you wish you would see more of, or if you...
Wow, she just said that she's the one of the people who runs the Twitter account of this. So now I get why the Under the Microscope tweeted that and took time to list everyone who's been listed there. And that's interesting because if they've listed themselves at number 11, then these numbers were actually legit. So we've been listed after them. Yeah, let me just start from where she talks about us.
At number 12, we have the Vulnerable Scientist podcast. Part of the process of increasing the awareness of what a scientist is humanizing the people doing the science. This is best done by listening to the stories and experiences of working scientists. The scientist, Sarah Nyakeri, has created a platform for Kenyan scientists to demystify the scientific institution and to tell their stories about their paths, their science, their careers, and their experiences trying to excel in the science. The scientific institution has many barriers and challenges. Conversations with people who are already established or who are on their way to becoming established within that institution is integral to help equip students and scholars who are trying to become more aware of this field and trying to think about where they might fit in. When we talk about science literacy, part of the battle is to make sure that audiences can relate to and connect with whoever it is that is communicating the information. Another battle is the language that is used to communicate this information. That is a separate conversation for another day. For here, we're just wanting to discuss the fact that it is important to listen to working scientists so that the idea of a scientist is not foreign and is not removed to the larger populace. And I think this podcast does a really great job of supporting the community of scientists who can relate to what is said by the speakers, and also for non-scientists who really want to understand what type of jobs are these, what are people facing, what are their challenges, who are they. All in all, this does a really great job, and so I would like to applaud Sarah Nyakeri and the Vulnerable Scientist podcast.
Thank you, Kefoi Kago for saying that. When I saw this post, I actually noticed that she talks about science in the language Agikuyu. And that's interesting actually because when I talk about science communication, it's important to talk to scientists in their own language. Even if they understand English, there's a different thing that occurs when you talk to someone in their own language. You connect with them in ways you can't connect with them in a foreign language. And since Kikuyu is a Kenyan language, it's just amazing to see that. One of the people I interviewed recently, I haven't uploaded yet, has a place where they talk about, I can't remember the name. I'll link it in that upcoming podcast where they talk about they talk about it's a pen pal thing where scientists who are Portuguese speaking can connect with students or younger people who are interested in science in their own language across all countries. And I found that very fascinating. Anyway, let's go back to I was mentioning the other developments, but before that, we also have a Facebook account. It has, I think, 4 followers, if I'm not wrong. We have a TikTok. I can't remember the last time. The last time I think I went there, it was about 3. I don't know now because I've not been posting as frequently as I should be posting, but we'll see about that. The other thing that has happened is this day around January, when I had a very bad day that day, and I woke up to this blog, and I'm going to read it out because this is someone who's not in science who got interested with the podcast. I don't know. I didn't even know this guy. I don't even know him right now. It's called Edwin. Sorry for that noise. And the podcast is about music, Kenyan music, I think. Yeah, Kenyan music. They review. It doesn't have to be popular music, just talking about music and talking about it. I found that very interesting. But at the same time, the person has a blog called Out of the Booth. It's called, the podcast is Out of the Booth podcast, but the feature that I'm talking about, the blog, where he features different Kenyan podcasts, interesting ones, and or African podcasts, and it's called today's podcast is. So he's published 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 podcasts, and mine was number. It was done. It was how the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It was the number 6. So this is someone who's done his research and found out something interesting. So I asked on a Twitter, where did you find it? And he's like, he's not sure, but he was looking for Kenyan podcast, and he saw this, The Vulnerable Scientist, and it was like, wow, amazing. And he was interested to know more about it. This is someone who's been in media for a while, and if you know the media, they really don't talk about the science. Like, the science features are very underappreciated, and for that, I wanted to highlight this on this podcast. And wow. Anyway, today's podcast is The Vulnerable Scientist. What does it take for you to be vulnerable? Are you comfortable with letting go and letting others in? What does vulnerable mean to you? In today's podcast scene, we rarely meet professionals from technical jobs that are actively involved in sharing their stories without having an emergency or trending topic that prompts their input. That notion is what this podcast fights. The Vulnerable Scientist is a Kenyan podcast that features scientists from various disciplines as they share the stories of how they fought to where they are, what their tasks involves, what it takes to be in their profession, and advice they would share in other interested parties. It is hosted by Sarah Nyakeri, decorated multidisciplinary individual. The podcast takes on an interview conversational tone with a featured guest taking up most of the time. One thing you will love about this show is how human the guest sounds. Now, before you judge, everyone has their own idea of a scientist and people involved in the more technical aspects of society. Personally, the mental image that I heard involved a lab coat, a pair of reading glasses, and an ever-sober tone when they speak. This is the podcast that changed all of that. As soon as you start listening, you hear the humor, the struggle, the casual, easygoing attitude, and most of all, you get to learn about the science without jargon. The podcast is targeted towards a young audience that is interested in science as a career option. In it, you find interviews with biochemists, bioinformaticians, academics, and a myriad of other individuals who not only study the sciences but also practice them. Often the episodes are released in a series, with some having 2 parts and others having more. Each episode takes about 25 to 35 minutes for the series, or it will take a whole hour and more for a compact episode. The guests, too, are mostly Kenyans, but you'll find out that most of them found greener pastures in different lands. You can listen to the podcast directly from their website or check it out on your podcast streaming platform of choice. Yeah. I really loved what this person wrote about, or what Eugene Post wrote about my podcast. Most of these words are not things that I ever mentioned on my podcast. These are things that he deduced after listening to the podcast. And that says a lot. That, I don't know, this one was big. This was very big for me. Another place that we've been featured on is Access to Perspectives. These are conversations or podcasts that talk about different topics when it comes to science. It is done by Johanna, or in German, Johanna Havemann. And I actually did a podcast with her last week. Yeah, it was a podcast recording. I was a guest talking about this podcast. But she's featured a number of people. She's kind of an interesting person. She's fun. Yeah. Just talking about being featured, I also went to Siakula Digital, just talking about their podcast and just a little bit about my life in science. So that is a place where they do Instagram lives. Ntiki does Instagram lives of scientists, and they talk about different things, then put the videos there up. Yeah, that's what she does. Another place. Where is the other place? I have forgotten. Anyway, just back to this. So I was looking for that. So on this Access to Perspectives, she has highlighted this podcast as a potential podcast to listen to. So if you know the format of this podcast in terms of like interviewing scientists and them telling their stories, there's this other podcast that you might want to listen to. It's called The Root of the Science podcast. It's hosted by Anne Chisa, Anne with an E, Chisa, and she is from Zimbabwe. Yeah, Zimbabwe or Malawi, I've forgotten. But we did a podcast with her, though we didn't finish. I'm yet to continue with that. And I loved that. I tell the story of how I actually came across it, and we just talk about it. And I loved the conversation that we have had so far. You should listen to the stories that are posted there if you want more content. There's a lot of content. She started way before me, like in 2020. So she has more productions that you can listen to. So let me know. Oh, there's another podcast that I came across that has the same kind of format where they tell about science stories, just humanizing the scientist, and it's called People Behind the Scientist. They say people behind the scientist. It's done by, I've forgotten the name of that scientist. McNally scientist. Someone McNally. It's not based in Kenya, but it's something worth listening to because it follows kind of the same format where You talk about scientists and just humanizing them. Yeah, Marie McNeely. Yeah. Yeah. She does neuroscience and psychology studies, and she brings different people who talk about their journeys and just talking about them as human beings. And I really loved that podcast. Yeah, so I think that's it. Is it? Yeah, that's it.